The hangar that morning felt like a tomb breathing smoke. I can still smell it. Cold metal, oil, the sting of gasoline, the kind of air that sticks to your tongue and tastes like rust. The war hadn't yet broken us, but it had already started eating pieces of who we were. I was 21, bones still soft, heart full of arrogance, thinking flying was a dance with the wind, not a negotiation with death. They called me lucky before I'd ever earned the name, just a farm boy from Kansas who thought he could outfly fear. I remember tightening my gloves until my fingers went numb, pretending I wasn't shaking. The B-17 loomed ahead, bigger than anything I'd ever trusted my life to. Her wings stretched wide like she knew she'd be carrying more than bombs. She'd be carrying our souls. The metal skin gleamed under the grey morning, cold and unforgiving. When I touched the yoke for the first time, it felt like grabbing hold of fate itself, rough, scarred, alive with vibrations that hummed straight through my arms. I told myself that was excitement, but it wasn't. It was terror, trying to hide behind a smirk. Captain Morris stood beside me, a man built from the same steel as the planes he flew. His face was carved by wind and sun, the kind of face that had seen too many boys burn out before they'd even lived. He didn't speak much, and when he did, it was like scripture, simple, heavy, final. "Altitude is life," he said, his voice calm enough to make the engines listen. "Speed is insurance. Panic is death." Those words clung to me like dog tags around my heart. I repeated them under my breath as we climbed inside, the engines coughing to life one by one, shaking the earth beneath us. The noise was deafening, a sound that could swallow your thoughts whole. I remember the smell of burnt fuel filling the cockpit, the way my hands refused to stop sweating even in the cold. As we rolled down the runway, my heart was slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. The ground blurred into nothing. We lifted, and for a moment, everything below disappeared. The base, the men, the war, all of it. There was only sky. I thought, this is freedom. The clouds opened wide like a promise, and for the first time, I understood why men would kill to fly. But that illusion didn't last. It never does. The first warning came as a hiccup in the left engine. Small, almost innocent. A pop, then another. Before I could even look, the flame erupted, bright and furious, swallowing the wing in orange. The cockpit filled with the smell of burning oil, thick and choking. My breath came short and fast. The gauges spun wild, the needles jittering like they'd lost their minds. I froze, my brain locked between fear and disbelief. The B-17 trembled, screaming through the air, and I realized the sky had teeth. Morris yelled something. I couldn't hear him. The roar drowned everything. I pulled back instinctively, trying to fight gravity, trying to climb, but the controls jerked like an animal trying to throw me off. The plane tilted hard left. My vision blurred as the blood drained from my head. The horizon spun like a wheel of fire. Somewhere in that chaos, I saw her, my mother, just for an instant, standing on our porch back home, wiping her hands on her apron, smiling at the boy she thought was going off to become a man. That flash hit harder than the fire. I wasn't ready to die. Not like this. Not before I'd even done anything worth dying for. The world tilted again. The altimeter dropped. I could taste metal in my mouth. I braced for the impact that never came. Then, everything went quiet for half a second. Just silent. In that frozen breath between panic and death, Morris did something I'd never seen before. Something that defied every instinct in me. He pushed the nose down. Every fiber of me wanted to scream, to pull up, to climb, but he forced it down, letting the plane dive. The fire trailed behind us, stretching away like a tail of smoke and fury. Wind tore at the flames, thinning them, starving them of breath. My stomach lifted into my throat. The ground was rushing toward us like it wanted to claim us whole. The altimeter spun madly. 400 feet, 300, 200. The trees below sharpened, their tops clawing at the belly of the bird. I thought we were done, but the fire flickered, sputtered, and, just like that, it died. The engine coughed, spit, then roared back to life, coughing out black smoke like a wounded beast. Morris leveled us out, eyes steady, hands unmoving, 100 feet from the ground, maybe less. We flew in silence all the way back. No one spoke, not a word. The air inside that cockpit was heavier than lead. When the wheels finally hit the runway, I didn't cheer, didn't breathe. I just sat there, hands trembling, the smell of smoke still in my nose, and realized I'd crossed a line I could never come back from. I looked at Morris. His face was grey with soot, but his eyes were calm, like he'd just played a game of cards and won. He turned to me and said quietly, "That's how you cheat death once. Don't make it a habit. Later, that maneuver, diving to starve the fire instead of climbing away, would become standard training for every pilot. They'd teach it in manuals, simulate it in schools, make it sound clinical. But back then, it wasn't a maneuver. It was survival. It was instinct. It was a man trusting the sky enough to fall into it before climbing again. And for me, it was the moment I stopped thinking flying was about freedom. It was about endurance, about holding on long enough to make it back to Earth in one piece. Tell me where you're watching this from. I want to see how far this story can fly. The days after that flight were strange. The world didn't look the same anymore. Every time I saw the sky, it felt less like freedom and more like a warning. I'd stare up at the clouds and see fire licking through them, hear that engine choking in my dreams. The other pilots slapped my back, called me a hero, said I'd done something brave, but they didn't know the truth. I hadn't done a damn thing. Morris saved us. I was just the terrified kid sitting beside him, frozen while he wrestled death and somehow won. The papers never wrote about the near misses, the moments when fear made your hands useless. They only cared about victories, not survival. But in war, survival is victory. And that was the lesson I learned before I ever saw combat. Morris never talked about it again. He was like that, the kind of man who believed you didn't learn from words, you learned from living. Every morning after that flight, he'd be out on the tarmac before the sun rose, pacing slow, his eyes scanning the horizon like he was reading something no one else could see. I started joining him, not out of duty, but because I wanted to understand. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm, steady, as if he'd already made peace with every possible way to die. I remember one morning, frost on the wings, our breath coming out like smoke. I asked him, "Weren't you scared, sir, when the engine caught fire?" He looked at me for a long time, then smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Of course I was scared. You think courage means you don't feel it. Courage means you fly anyway. Then he went back to checking the propellers like the conversation never happened. That day changed me in ways I didn't understand until much later. I stopped trying to impress anyone. I stopped thinking I was invincible. The sky had shown me who was in charge, and it wasn't us. Every mission after that, I carried a little less pride and a little more respect for the machines we flew and the men who flew them. You learn quickly that flying isn't about skill, it's about trust. You trust your crew, your training, your instincts, and sometimes even luck, especially luck. A week later, the news came down that we were shipping out. Europe. Real missions, real targets. No more training runs over Kansas fields. I remember standing in line to receive our orders, the paper trembling in my hand. The room was filled with young men pretending not to care, laughing too loud, smoking too much, every one of them trying to bury the same fear under jokes and swagger. Morris was assigned to lead our squadron. When he looked over the roster, his eyes stopped on my name. "Lucky," he said. "Looks like you're still with me." I nodded, trying to act calm, but my stomach dropped. Part of me wanted to go, to prove myself. Another part wanted to run as far from the war as possible, but nobody ran. Not then. We just swallowed it down and waited for dawn. The night before we left, I sat outside the barracks with a cup of weak coffee, staring at the hangars glowing faintly under the moonlight. The hum of engines being tested carried through the air, that constant low vibration that felt like the heartbeat of something too big to stop. I thought about home, my father's old truck, the porch light that never went out, my mother's hands wiping flour off her apron. I wondered if she could feel it somehow, that her boy had almost died and didn't even tell her. I wrote her a letter that night, the words coming slow, heavy. I told her I was learning fast, that the sky was beautiful, that everything was fine. I didn't mention the fire, or the dive, or the way my hands still shook when I smelled oil. You don't write fear into letters home. You protect them from it. You keep the war out of the kitchen, even when it's already inside you. When dawn broke, the sky was pink and soft, cruelly beautiful. We loaded up the planes, lined up on the runway like a fleet of silver ghosts. Morris walked past each crew, nodding, saying nothing. When he reached me, he stopped, looked me in the eye, and said quietly, "Remember the fire. Remember what saved us." I nodded. That was all he said before climbing into his ship. As the engines started, the vibration ran up through my legs, into my chest, until my heart matched it beat for beat. I looked out the window as we rose, the earth falling away, the sun cutting through the clouds like a blade. It should have been beautiful. It wasn't. It felt like goodbye. For a long time, I wondered if the trick Morris taught that day, that dive that saved us, was luck or instinct, or maybe just desperation wearing the mask of genius. But later, when I saw men pull the same move and live, I realized it was something more. It was the line between panic and control, between dying and surviving. It was proof that even in chaos, There's a kind of order if you can stay calm enough to find it. If you're hearing this now, it's probably because part of you understands what it means to be afraid, but to move anyway. That's what this war made of us. Not heroes, not legends, just men who refuse to stop. If you're feeling that too, if you've ever had to face something that tried to break you, hit that subscribe button, because this story is just getting started. The first time we flew into combat, the sky looked harmless, like it didn't know what waited for us inside it. Dawn light painted the clouds gold, and for a moment, it almost fooled me into thinking it would be a beautiful day. But beauty was just another kind of camouflage. We were flying out of England, the air wet and heavy, the smell of diesel mixing with... The target was a factory in Bremen, deep in Germany. They told us it was heavily defended, but nobody ever told us how that actually felt. They couldn't. You had to live it to understand. The roar of 4 Wright cyclones filled the plane, steady and deafening, shaking the world until your bones hummed. My headset crackled with voices, numbers, coordinates, fragments of sentences cut short by static. I looked down the fuselage at the rest of the crew. 10 men, each locked in their own ritual. Some checked gauges over and over. Some just stared ahead, silent, lips moving in prayers they didn't want anyone to hear. I wasn't sure which was worse, pretending you weren't scared or admitting you were. We climbed higher, breaking through the last layer of clouds. The world below vanished in a soft white blanket. Above, the sun hit the wings, turning them silver, blinding. It looked peaceful. I almost laughed at the thought. Peace at 20,000 feet. The joke died fast when Morris's voice came over the radio. Eyes open, boys. Bandits likely ahead. His tone never changed, not even when death was coming. I tried to focus on the horizon, on the flicker of distant contrails. At first it was just dots, tiny, harmless specks. Then the sun caught them, and I saw the gleam of fighters, Focke-Wulfs, dozens of them, sliding out of the clouds like sharks circling blood. The air around us seemed to tighten. I could feel the fear move through the crew like static. No one said a word. The attack started fast. The first burst of flak exploded off our right wing. Black smoke, shrapnel pinging off the fuselage like hail. The sound was a mix of thunder and metal screaming. My whole body jerked as if the sky had punched me. The smell of cordite filled the cabin. Another explosion shook us, closer this time, and I heard someone curse through the intercom. The formation started to wobble, men tightening up, trying to hold steady while death fell from the clouds. I looked out the side window just in time to see one of our ships take a direct hit. The wing tore clean off. For a second, it looked like the plane was hanging in the air, frozen in disbelief, before it spun into a spiral of smoke and fire. 10 men gone in 3 seconds. No parachutes, no time. Hold formation, Morris barked. His voice cut through the chaos like a whip. My hands clenched around the controls. The vibration was constant, like the plane was alive and angry. Then the fighters came. They dropped out of the sun, diving hard, machine guns flashing, tracers sliced through the sky, red and white lines, beautiful in a sick way. You could see death coming, glowing like firework. The top turret opened up, the staccato rhythm of 50 calibers hammering back. The smell of gunpowder mixed with smoke and sweat. The noise was beyond sound. It was a physical thing, pressing against your chest, shaking your teeth. I remember seeing one fighter peel toward us, head on. He was so close I could see the pilot's goggles reflecting the sunlight. Time slowed. I fired instinctively, holding the trigger down until the barrel smoked. His nose lit up with muzzle flashes, then vanished in a burst of flame. He passed so close I thought he'd take our wing with him. I caught a glimpse of his plane tumbling, spiraling into the clouds below, and for a heartbeat I felt something like victory. It didn't last. The next one came at us from below. The radio was a mess of shouting, coordinates, screams. I could barely tell which voice was real. We lost another ship off our left flank. This one tried to pull up, but the tail was gone. I watched 2 tiny figures jump, parachutes that never opened. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. You learn quickly that you can't save anyone up there. You just fly and hope it's not your turn yet. Every second felt like a minute, every minute an hour. My throat was dry, and my hands ached from gripping the controls too tight. Somewhere behind me, the waist gunner was yelling that his ammo was jammed. I turned my head, saw him banging the gun with his fist, his face streaked with sweat and soot. Before I could say anything, Morris's voice cut in again. Incoming! 9 o'clock! I looked left just in time to see a fighter closing in, cannons flashing. The sound hit before the impact did. The entire left side of the plane shuddered. Metal tore. Alarms screamed. Smoke poured into the cockpit. I thought we'd lost the engine again. And for a second, the memory of that first flight came rushing back. The fire, the dive, the helplessness. "Feather number 2!" Morris shouted. His hands were steady, even as the plane bucked like a dying animal. The propeller stopped spinning. We were losing altitude fast. "Hold her level!" he barked, and I tried. God knows I tried. But the controls felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. The altimeter spun. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the engine's. "Come on, Lucky," he said, calm but sharp. "You know what to do." And I did. Every nerve in my body screamed against it, but I pushed the nose down, the same trick that saved us once. The fire trailed behind, whipped by wind, struggling to feed itself. The sky and earth blurred into one wild motion. We dropped like a stone. The German fighters shot past us, too fast to turn back. The air tore at the fuselage, and I thought the wings would snap, but the fire died. Again, the wind starved it. We leveled out just above the cloud deck, barely a few hundred feet higher than we should have been. The plane groaned, wounded, but alive. The radio was silent for a long moment, just static. Then Morris laughed, a single, low, exhausted laugh. "That's twice, Lucky," he said. "You're starting to make a habit of it." I couldn't answer. I was shaking too hard. My mouth was dry as dust. We made it back on 3 engines, limping across the channel like a bird with one wing half torn. When we landed, the ground crews counted 78 holes in the fuselage. 78. The right tail gunner was hit, the radio operator deaf from the blast. But we made it. That was the thing. No one cared how bad you got torn up, as long as you made it back. I remember stepping onto the runway, knees weak, looking at the plane like she was a living thing. Smoke curled from her side, but she stood solid, proud. I wanted to kiss the ground. Instead, I just sat down, right there on the tarmac, and laughed until I cried. That was the day I understood that survival isn't courage. It's stubbornness. It's refusing to let the sky win. And that dive, that insane instinct to fall before you climb, it wasn't just a maneuver anymore. It was a lifeline. Every pilot who saw what we did that day learned it by heart. Some lived because of it, some didn't. But that was war. Lessons written in blood. When we got back to base that evening, the sky was still burning in the west, the kind of sunset that feels cruel after what you've just seen. The world shouldn't look beautiful when so many men don't come home. The airfield smelled like oil and smoke and the faint sweetness of grass, a strange reminder that life still existed somewhere outside the roar of engine, the echo of gunfire. Mechanics swarmed over the B-17, touching her like a wounded animal, whispering to each other in low tones. 78 holes, they said. One more, and she'd have been shredded to pieces. I sat on an ammo crate, my flight suit soaked in sweat and oil, staring at the black streaks along the fuselage. The metal still radiated heat from the near fire. My gloves were stiff with dried sweat, my fingers trembling every time I tried to light a cigarette. I didn't even smoke before the war. Now, it was the only way to make my hands stop shaking. The medics came for Taylor, our tail gunner. Shrapnel had torn through his thigh, and though he joked through the pain, his face told the truth. He wouldn't fly again. The radio operator, Jenkins, sat near him. Blood dried in his ears. He couldn't hear a thing, just kept staring at the ground, lips moving like he was talking to someone who wasn't there. None of us tried to stop him. You don't interrupt a man when he's talking to ghosts. Morris came over, his uniform covered in soot, his eyes hollow but alive. He looked at me and said, "You did good, Lucky." I wanted to believe him, but all I could see when I closed my eyes were the other planes, the ones that didn't make it back, the ones still burning somewhere over the sea, their crews turned to ash. "Good," I said, almost laughing. "We lost 4 ships, Morris, 40 men." He nodded slowly, not arguing, not agreeing. "And 6 made it home because you didn't panic," he said quietly. Then he walked away. That was Morris. Never raised his voice, never flinched, never let you see the cracks. That night, the barracks were silent. Usually there was noise, laughter, music from a broken radio, cards slapping against a table, but not that night. Just the hum of the generator outside and the sound of men breathing in the dark. You could tell who was awake by the glowing ends of cigarettes. Nobody slept. Sleep meant dreaming, and dreaming meant remembering. I lay on my bunk, staring at the ceiling. The image of that fighter pilot's face still burned behind my eyes, the one I'd shot down. He couldn't have been older than me, maybe younger. I kept thinking about the split second when our eyes met before his plane went up in flames. He was just doing what I was doing, trying to get home. The thought sat in my gut like a stone. The next morning, the chaplain held a short service for the men who didn't return. The names were read out loud. I recognized every one of them. We stood in formation while the wind carried their names into the distance. and I felt something break quietly inside me. They tell you not to get close to anyone. They tell you it makes it easier when they're gone. They lie. You get close anyway. You can't help it. You share the same air, the same fear, the same sky. You start to know a man not by his words, but by the way he breathes. When the flak starts bursting around you, when that breathing stops, a piece of you goes with him. After the service, I found Morris sitting on a fuel drum, staring at nothing. He had a cigarette burning between his fingers, the ash hanging long and unbroken. "You ever think about quitting?" I asked him. He looked at me like he didn't understand the question. "Quitting?" he said. "You mean living long enough to see this end?" He laughed once, a sound too dry to be humor. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the ones I left behind. If I stop flying, they'll stop coming home. So no, I don't quit." I didn't know what to say to that. Maybe there was nothing to say. Later that week, they showed us footage from reconnaissance, photos taken from high above the target. The factory was gone, rubble. Mission successful, they said. The room filled with a strange sound, half relief, half emptiness. Success didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss with a ribbon on it. I looked around and realized the faces were changing. Every mission, new men arrived and others didn't return. The barracks felt like a revolving door of ghosts wearing different names. You stopped asking where someone was if their bed stayed empty after a mission you already knew. One night, I walked out to the edge of the airfield alone. The sky was clear, full of stars, quiet, too quiet. I sat there watching the planes lined up, their silhouettes black against the moonlight. I could hear the wind moving through the grass and the faint ticking of cooling metal from the day's flights. That sound always got to me. The sound of a plane cooling down after surviving the impossible, like it was breathing, alive. I thought about what Morris had said. That courage wasn't the absence of fear. I finally understood. Courage was the ability to fly even when every part of you screamed not to. It wasn't heroism, it was obligation. You did it for the man next to you, for the family waiting across an ocean, for the ones who didn't get to come back. I realized something else that night, that the trick Morris had taught me, that dive to starve the fire, wasn't just a flying maneuver. It was life. Sometimes you had to go down before you could rise again. Sometimes you had to surrender control to survive. Every instinct tells you to pull up, to fight gravity, but if you listen too much to fear, you burn. If you let go, just for a moment, you live. That thought stayed with me long after the war. Tell me something. If you were in my place, and you'd seen friends disappear in fire and smoke, do you think you could keep flying? Comment with, "I'd still fly if you think you could." I want to know who'd have stayed in the sky. The letters were the hardest part. You could face gunfire, flak, fire, and falling from the sky. But nothing could prepare you for the quiet that came when you sat at a desk with a pen in your hand, trying to make words sound like hope. I wrote home every week, sometimes twice, though I never told the truth. I wrote about the weather, about how the food wasn't too bad, how the men were holding up, how the engines sounded strong. I wrote that the sunsets here were different, brighter somehow, like the sky knew how to forgive. I told my mother I was proud to serve. I told my father I was learning discipline. I told them I was safe. Every word was a lie wrapped in love. You can't write about fear. You can't describe the smell of burning oil or the sound of men screaming through a radio. You can't tell your mother that you see death every time you blink. So you give them a story they can live with, not the truth that would destroy them. The chaplain used to say that war was God's way of teaching men patience. I didn't believe him. War doesn't teach patience. It teaches silence. It teaches you how to sit still while the world collapses around you. The days between missions were the worst. Waiting, listening to the rain hit the tin roof, wondering if your luck had an expiration date. We'd clean our gear, check our guns, write letters, play cards, anything to pretend that the next mission wasn't coming, but it always was. You'd hear the engines start in the morning mist, and your stomach would tighten before you even saw the orders. Some men found ways to keep their minds busy. Jokes, cards, whiskey. Me, I wrote. It was the only thing that made sense. One night, I got a letter from home, the kind that smelled faintly of soap and wood smoke. My mother's handwriting, shaky but strong. She said the crops were thin that year, that the dogs still slept on the porch, that my father didn't talk much anymore but checked the mailbox every day, even when he knew there was no mail coming. She said she prayed for me every morning. I read that letter a dozen times, maybe more. I could almost hear her voice in the words. And for the first time, I felt something worse than fear, guilt, because the boy she was writing to wasn't the same one who left. That boy believed in right and wrong, in glory, in a clean kind of courage. The man reading her letter knew better. There was no glory in burning cities or empty bunks. There was only endurance, surviving long enough to send another lie home. I remember sitting outside the barracks with that letter in my hands, the paper soft from how many times I'd folded it. The moonlight caught the edge of the hangar, and I could see the outline of the planes resting like sleeping giants. Each one had a name painted on its nose: Liberty Bell, Iron Maiden, Miss Sally. They were more than machines to us. We talked to them like they were people, cursed them, thanked them, prayed to them. You learned to believe that a plane could love you back if you treated it. I used to pat the side of ours before takeoff, whisper a few words no one ever heard. A ritual, maybe. Superstition keeps you sane when logic won't. That night, I wrote another letter. This one I didn't send. I wrote it for myself, or maybe for the man I used to be. I wrote about the first flight, about the fire, about Morris's dive and how it saved us. I wrote about the missions that followed, the friends I'd lost, the way fear never really left, just changed shape. I wrote that I was tired, not just in my body, but in my bones. I wrote that sometimes I wished the war would end, no matter who won, just so the noise would stop. I wrote until my hand cramped, until there was nothing left to say. Then I folded the letter, slid it into my pocket, and carried it with me on every mission afterward. It became a kind of charm, a reminder that words still meant something in a world that didn't. As the months passed, the faces around me kept changing. Some transferred, most gone for good. The barracks emptied, refilled, emptied again. New boys came in, wide-eyed and loud, the same way I once. I tried not to learn their names, but I always did. You couldn't help it. And every time one didn't come back, I'd feel that same weight in my chest, the one that never got lighter, no matter how often it happened. I started to understand why Morris never got close to anyone. You could only carry so many ghosts before you started breaking under their weight. But even then, even surrounded by death, there were moments that felt almost human. The cook burning coffee, but smiling anyway. The mechanic who'd hum old songs from Georgia while patching bullet holes. The smell of rain hitting the airfield just before dawn. Those tiny pieces of normal life were like lifelines. You learned to collect them, hold them close, because they reminded you that you were still alive, that there was still something worth going home to. Sometimes I'd stand by the runway at sunset, watching the planes take off for the night raid. Their engines roared against the dying light, and the sound vibrated in my chest until it felt like part of me. I used to think that once the war ended, I'd never want to hear that sound again. But deep down, I knew I'd miss it, because it wasn't just noise. It was proof that we were still here, still fighting, still breathing. If you've ever written a message to someone you love and had to hide the truth behind it, you know what I mean. You know that kind of silence, the one that hurts worse than bullets. Luck doesn't last forever. That's something every pilot learns sooner or later, though most don't live long enough to say it out loud. We'd been flying missions for months by then, too many to count, and everyone left another mark on the plane, another scar on us. The engines coughed more than they purred. The metal skin was patched so many times it looked like a quilt. We were worn the same way, bodies stiff, eyes hollow, laughter that didn't sound real anymore. The newer crews called us veterans like it meant something noble. But there's nothing noble about outliving people better than you. Survival isn't pride. It's just what happens when death misses by inches. The morning it happened, the air was heavy with fog, so thick you could taste it. The ground crew said the weather would clear by noon, and command didn't want to wait. Bremen, again. Same target, same path, through hell. I remember sitting in the cockpit, fingers tapping against the throttle, trying to steady my breathing. The engines rumbled to life, one by one, shaking the ground beneath us. Morris climbed aboard last. Same ritual as always. One hand on the fuselage, a quiet word I never quite caught. He looked at me and nodded. "We'll be fine," he said, and I believed him, because I had to. We took off into grey nothingness. The world disappeared within minutes. Just cloud and noise and the faint glow of instruments on the dash. I couldn't see the other planes, just their ghostly shapes flickering in and out of mist. The intercom hissed and cracked, voices calling positions that meant nothing when the sky itself was blind. I gripped the yoke so tight my knuckles went white. The cold crept in through every seam, biting deep. Hours passed like flying inside a cloud, surrounded by the kind of silence that only exists when death is near. Then, without warning, the world erupted. The first flak burst was so close it rocked the plane sideways. Black smoke filled the window. The formation broke apart instantly, each ship diving or climbing on instinct. The radio exploded with chaos. Orders, curses, screams. The sky was on fire. I could see flashes of light all around, shells bursting, planes turning to falling metal. It was like flying through the inside of a storm made of explosions. The noise was unbearable, a constant thunder that pounded through the skull. My vision blurred from the vibration. One of the bursts hit close enough to knock out our number 3 engine. The propeller stopped, a blur of motion freezing mid-spin. Smoke trailed behind us, thick and dark. Morris barked commands, voice calm but sharp. "Feather 3! Hold her steady!" I tried, but the plane fought back, tilting hard to the right. My arms ached from the strain. The gauges danced wildly. Then another explosion, closer this time. The cockpit filled with the smell of burnt insulation. A red light blinked, fuel leaked. My stomach dropped. The waist gunner shouted something about fighters, but I couldn't make it out. A shadow shot past the window. A Messerschmitt, close enough for me to see the black cross on its side. Tracers zipped through the air, cutting across our nose. Jenkins in the top turret opened up, his guns spitting fire. The air inside the plane turned thick with smoke and cordite. Every sense screamed overload. Sight, sound, smell, everything blending into one long panic. I could feel the plane bleeding altitude, the altimeter spinning too fast to read. Then came the hit that changed everything. A shell tore through the belly and exploded near the bomb bay. The blast threw me forward against the controls. The sound wasn't a boom. It was a crack, sharp and final, like the world itself had split open. Fire roared through the fuselage, bright orange licking up the walls. The heat hit my face like a furnace door swinging open. The oxygen masks burned away in seconds. I heard someone scream, maybe the co-pilot, maybe me. I didn't know. "Get ready to bail," Morris shouted, his voice raw. He was half turned toward the crew, trying to reach the emergency hatch when another explosion hit. The plane jerked again, and he fell against the console. Blood streaked his temple. I reached for him, yelling his name, but he shook his head. "Fly the damn plane, Lucky!" That was the last clear thing he said. The fire grew louder, the wind howling through holes torn in the hull. My gloves were smoking from the heat of the controls. The sky outside was a blur of grey and flame. For a moment, instinct took over. Not training, not courage, just instinct. I shoved the nose down. It was madness, but it was the only thing I knew that worked. The world tilted, gravity slamming me against the straps. The fire stretched backward, whipping through the fuselage. I could barely see, barely breathe. Everything in me screamed that we were going to die. The altimeter spun, the wind screamed, and I felt the wings shudder under the strain. Then, like before, the fire starved. It didn't go out all at once. It fought back, clawing for air, then slowly faded, shrinking to black smoke. The plane held together somehow. I leveled off just above the clouds, the engine sputtering but still alive. The cabin was half destroyed. Morris unconscious beside me, the rest of the crew silent on the intercom. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind. Then, faintly, I heard a voice crackle through the static. "Lucky, are we still up?" It was Jenkins, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer. I just looked at the sky and realized I had nothing left to give. Not fear, not faith, not hope. Just the will to keep the wings level. That was the day I stopped believing in luck. The day the war ended, the sky was clear, the kind of blue that almost felt like a lie. The engines were silent for no takeoffs, no formation drills, no checklists shouted through the roar. Just silence. It felt wrong, like the world had forgotten how to breathe. Word came down in the morning. Germany had surrendered. The men cheered. Some cried. Some just stared at the ground. I didn't feel anything at first. Not joy, not relief, just emptiness. The kind of emptiness that comes when you've been holding your breath for too long and suddenly realize you don't know how to exhale. We spent that day wandering the base like ghosts. Planes lined up on the tarmac, their bellies empty, their wings still scarred. The smell of oil and smoke still clung to everything, even though the engines hadn't run in days. Mechanics stood around with nothing to fix. Gunners smoked in silence. Pilots wrote letters home they didn't know how to finish. Nobody knew what to do with peace. It was like someone had taken away the only thing that gave shape to our lives. For so long, every sunrise had meant another mission. Every heartbeat had been borrowed time. Now time stretched open, endless and uncertain. They told us we'd be going home soon. Home. That word felt strange in my mouth. I dreamed of it every night, but when the day finally came, I wasn't ready. I packed my gear in silence. My flight jacket still smelled of smoke and sweat. I ran my hand along the fuselage of the old bird one last time. The metal was cool now, still dented, still rough. She'd brought us home when she shouldn't have. She'd held together when everything else fell apart. I whispered a thank you that no one heard. When we finally shipped back, the sea looked calm. endless. Men laughed on the deck, played cards, drank whatever they could find. I stayed by the railing most nights, staring at the horizon, wondering what waited beyond it. I thought about Morris, about the crew we'd lost, about the faces that still showed up in my dreams. I thought about the letter in my pocket, the one I'd written and never sent. I pulled it out once, unfolded the worn paper, and read it under the moonlight. The words still felt alive, still true, but I didn't need to send it anymore. The person it was written for was gone, not dead, just changed beyond recognition. When I stepped off the train in Kansas, everything felt too still. The air was warm, the fields stretched wide, the same as I remembered, but different somehow. My mother was waiting on the platform. She looked smaller, older. Her hands shook when she hugged me, but her grip was strong. My father stood behind her, hat in his hands, eyes wet but proud. They said they'd prayed for me every night. I didn't know how to tell them that I'd stopped praying a long time ago. I tried to smile, but it felt like a mask I didn't know how to take off. The first night home, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every gust of wind sounded like flak bursting in the distance. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, hands clutching the sheets like control lever. My mother found me sitting on the porch before dawn, staring at the sky. "It's over now," she said softly. I nodded, but I didn't believe it. The war doesn't end when they tell you it's over. It stays inside you, hiding in the quiet. Sometimes, when the wind's just right, I swear I can still hear the engines, that deep, rolling sound that used to mean death, but somehow meant life too. It's strange. I hated that sound once, but now I miss it. Because when the engines were running, I knew who I was. A pilot, a soldier, a survivor. Now I'm just a man who came back when so many didn't. They still call me lucky, but I don't think that's what I am. I'm just what's left. If you've made it this far, hit the like button, subscribe, and keep these stories alive. Because memory, that's the only flight we've got left.